What if you can get rid of repetitive Excel tasks? Things that used to take you hours, now in seconds. Yeah, it's possible. And it's called Power Query. And it's when I learned how to use Power Query that I began to understand data in a whole new way. But here's the thing. Most people don't use Power Query because they, well, haven't ever really heard of Power Query. And for those who have heard of it, they're pretty overwhelmed at the thought of learning it. But it's actually really easy to use. In fact, you don't even need to write any code. And I'm gonna show you by first fixing this problem. So here's my problem. I have these 4 files, which is an AP export from my general ledger. Now, as you can see, all of these exports include a different currency. I'm only interested in really seeing the information based off of US dollars. So I have this file over here that shows the exchange rate from September 1st all the way through the end of 2024 for each of these currencies. And I also want to understand who exactly are the department heads who are responsible for approving each and every single one of these expenses. So for that, I have this file, which showcases the department and the department head for each and every single company. It would also be nice if I can combine all of these ledgers into one file, so I won't have to repeat these steps across every single individual file. So how exactly would you do this the manual way? Well, this is generally how I would do it. Let me create a new workbook, and I'm gonna now take September's information and copy and paste it over here. Then I'm gonna repeat these same steps for all of my other AP ledgers by just copying and pasting. Okay, so now I have all the information in one file. I need to get the department and the department head into these 2 columns. So for that, I'm just gonna take this department heads over here, I'll make a copy. And now I'll just write department and department head. Now let's use an XLOOKUP to bring this information in. So I wanna look up this value over here, the company, inside the lookup array right over here. And I wanna return the actual department. All right, and now let's do the same thing for the department head, only this time, instead of returning the department, we're gonna return the department head. Okay, now I need to bring in the exchange rate to then get the US dollars amount. So let me just copy this file now into that main file. All right, and now I'll just write exchange rate. And now I'll use an index match by taking this entire region over here. For the row, I'm gonna match the date. And for the column, I'm gonna match the currency. All right, I'll hit enter, and now I have the exchange rate. And then finally, to get the US dollars, I'm just gonna take this multiplied by this. Okay, that process worked, but that was a lot of steps. Let's think of everything that we did. We loaded in all of the files for our AP ledgers. We combined them into one file. We did a lookup to find the department and the department owner. And then finally, we did another lookup in order to find the exchange rate. My plan instead is to transform things so that it looks like this. I can filter on any department and I could see all the amounts that are owed across not only these 4 files, but potentially dozens or even hundreds of files. And I won't need to repeat these steps at all every month if I do it with Power Query. And let me show you how to do that. But first, a few notes to help you better understand how to use Power Query. It's actually no longer called Power Query. It used to when it was introduced to Excel as a plugin. But now it's called Get and Transform. But everyone still calls it Power Query, so we'll stick with that name. Power Query is an ETL tool, which stands for extract, transform, and load. Extract means pulling in data, so that can be from a table in your Excel file, or another file, or even a folder containing multiple files. But the real magic is when you then transform that data. And pretty much any way that you can transform data in Excel, say by formulas or lookups, you can do in Power Query, which allows you to then load your data. And what's so cool is you then have a connection between these 2 tables. This here is your source. It looks exactly as it looks like when you first downloaded it. Then we're gonna make all these transformations in Power Query and we loaded it back. And let me show you how to do that. But I first have to explain to you one more thing about, well, data. This here is what's called structured data. This is unstructured data. And this is semi-structured data. What do you think makes this structured data? Well, think about it. There's a structure to the way this data is presented. Each column here has a specific task, and each row looks and behaves the same. This makes your data really easy to manipulate. And think about it. Here's a profit and loss. If I wanted to, let's say, create a summary for each value in my profit and loss by toggling on the dates or on the account, it wouldn't really be so easy to do it with my data in this format. But if I unpivoted this and turned it into a structured table, well, now I could do a basic sum ifs, choosing the metric and the dates, and my value instantly appears. Don't worry, I'll show you how to do this in just a few minutes. But do you see the way we're consuming this data? This is an unstructured format, and that's actually really useful because us human beings prefer to consume content in this format. So that means you need to pretty much have this middle layer between your source data and your data that you're presenting. And that middle layer is where you can run all of your calculations in such an easy way. And Power Query mainly works with structured data. Well, it gives you some flexibility when loading your source data, but it'll always serve you back structured data. And once you start to understand the power of getting your data into a table-like format, you'll be able to do some amazing things. In fact, Excel has this special object called a table. And no, it's not just data that's shown in a table-like format. It's when you actually hit Control-T or Insert Table. And when you do that, you'll unlock some amazing benefits, like automatically extending if you enter a new record. So if you have any formula referencing this column, now we'll pick up that new record. Oh, and see the formula bar? It shows now the table name and column name instead of the cell reference. This gives me greater visibility into what it's doing. And you can change the styling really easily, or select a row of just a table or just a column in a simple keyboard shortcut. But the biggest is that you can then pull it into a pivot table. That's right, you actually can't create a pivot table without first creating a table. So now that we've got that tutorial out of the way, let's have some fun in Power Query. So here I have my table as I exported it from my accounting software. Let's load this into Power Query. I'm gonna click on Data, and then I'm gonna click on From Table Arrange. Now, when I do that, you'll notice that Excel automatically wants to convert my information to a table. Now, I'll show you in just a sec how to not convert to a table and load from other sources. Well, let's just go ahead and check off my table has headers, and I will click OK. And here I am now in the Power Query editor. So you'll notice that I have my table loaded in, and I have my table name over here, and some applied steps where Power Query automatically took the source from the table name, table 1, and then changed the type as you see over here. So if I just click these buttons, you'll see that this is showing the formatting for this cell. So this over here is a number, this over here is a date time. I can just click on date instead of time, and now Power Query is asking me if I want to replace the current step, which made all these transformations, or add a new step. I'm just gonna click on replace current, and there you go. I can do the same thing with this. And now let's do a really brief walkthrough of the actual ribbon that we see. So this is the transform section where we can transform any of our existing data. So for example, I could just come here and for a month, say convert the due date to the end of the month if I wanted to. And you'll notice that it changed these all to the end of the month and added this step. And I can just click back and you can see the difference. So I don't need that, so I'm just gonna delete that step. And now we have that here. I can also add a column. So this section in the Power Query ribbon allows me to add a column and choose from any example of existing formulas or create my own formula, which we'll do shortly. And then lastly, I have some view options. I can click on column distribution over here and it'll add this helpful summary of how my data actually looks, but that's a bit of a distractor for now. I'm gonna uncheck that. And the first thing I wanna do is instead of calling this table 1, let's give this a descriptive name. So let's call this AP_accept. Okay, now I could do a number of other things. I could, let's say, create a filter for just one of the currencies, and then this is what will get loaded back. I could also rearrange the column. So let's just move currency all the way to the left over here. All right, let's just see what things look like if I now reload this table. So I'm gonna click on File, Close and Load To. And now I have options for how I could load this data back. Now, there were just some basic transformations here, but it'll illustrate the point. We're gonna load it back as a table, but what we could also do is bypass loading it as a table and just put it straight into a pivot table. Let's say to see our outstanding invoices by vendor. I could also load this directly to a pivot chart, or I could only create a connection. And what that'll in essence do is load the information with all the transformations into Power Query, but only once I'm done with all the transformations that I need to make across multiple tables will I then load it back. You'll also notice this button over here, add this data to the data model. That involves Power Query's Power Pivot, and that is a great step 2 after you get really familiar with Power Query. Now, I have a whole video over here on Excel's Power Pivot where we build the ultimate pivot table. For now, I'm just gonna load my data back as a table so that you can see what exactly we're doing. Okay, so notice what we have over here. First, if I click on data and then queries and connections, you'll see this sidebar over here. But this table is actually our transform table. Think about it. This over here showcase the invoice number, then the date, then the currency, and then the amount. This instead shows the invoice number and then the currency. So this doesn't seem so exciting of a transformation, but it really just goes to show that any changes that I now make over here, let's say I change this to 30,000, all I need to do is go to this and hit refresh all. And now this 29,961 just transformed to 30,000. So we're gonna now layer on a bunch of other transformations into our data, and each time, all we'll need to do is hit the refresh button to be able to see our transformed data loaded back. Okay, so first, I'm really not a fan of the styling, so I'm just gonna click on table design and we're gonna choose nothing. I'm gonna do the same thing for my source table. All right, so now let's take this to the next level. Let's bring in the department and the department head of who's responsible for each and every single one of these vendor bills. So to get back to where we were, I'm gonna double click on AP_September, and now I'm back in the Power Query editor. And the information that I need for the departments and department owners lie in this external file called department heads. And this is what it looks like. You can see the company, the department, and the respective department head. So let's now get this information into our file. Now, without using Power Query, what I would do is bring this information manually as a new tab into this file. I would then do a lookup function in order to bring in both the department as well as the department owner. But with Power Query, I can instead do that directly from the Power Query editor. Let me show you what I mean. So let me close out this file first, and then I'm gonna go back to data, and this time I'm gonna click on the button here to get data from a separate file. And I'm gonna click on From Excel Workbook. But as you can see, there are a bunch of other options, and soon we'll go over my favorite, pulling in a bunch of files from a folder. I'm gonna click on From Excel Workbook, and I'm now gonna point to this file called Department Heads. And you can see that Power Query found the file, and it's asking me which range of data do I wanna pull in? Well, I really only have one piece of data, and that's what I have populated in this first tab, Sheet 1. So I'm gonna click on Transform this data. And now I'm back in the Power Query editor. And as you can see, Power Query by default already took some automation steps. It found this file over here and then extracted it as a table, and it changed some of the actual formatting. Now this over here, this is called M, and that's the language in which Power Query runs on. But the great news is you don't really need to learn M. In fact, I'm not even so familiar with how to use M. Instead, any steps you take in Power Query will automatically be recorded in the advanced editor over here. Okay, so let's make some transformations. Again, I need to get both the department as well as the department head into this file over here. Well, first, I'm gonna rename this department_heads. Then it looks like row 1 is where my headers are. Well, I can just click this button over here, use first rows as headers. Perfect. So now let's bring in the department and department head. So I'm gonna click on AP_September, and I'm going to click on Merge Queries. Now I can merge this information into this existing table, but just to be safe, I'm gonna create a new query instead. So I'll click Merge Queries as New. All right, now we're ready to merge our information. So the way I want you to think about merging is in essence taking two tables and merging them together sideways as such. Soon, we'll cover appending, which is similar to a merge, only instead of combining it sideways, you're stacking two right on top of each other. So I'm gonna choose the table that I want, which in this case is department heads, to merge with AP_September. And now we need to find the common lookup. Now this is key. One of my tables needs to have a unique list on that unique identifier, and that's company. So company is listed multiple times on this table, but it's only listed once, one for each department and department head in this table. There aren't multiple matches. Otherwise, our merge or lookup would fail. So I'm just gonna click on company. And as you can see, all 27 rows from my first table found a match from this table over here. So when I click on OK, again, to really help you conceptualize what a merge is, I'm gonna click this button over here, and I'm gonna select all three of these columns. Now, you can see that Power Query took that table and found the corresponding match every time the company matched, which was our lookup. Now, this is actually a bit excessive. We don't need to pull in the company again because we already have it uniquely displayed here. And on top of that, I don't really want this to read the table name and then the actual column, so we'll redo that in a second. But first, let me double click on this step over here, and that's gonna bring back this step where I expanded the department heads. Well, we don't need company, but I do want department and I do want department head. So let me now click OK. And now let's just change this to say department, and we'll say that this is department head. Okay, now let's watch what happens whenever I close and load this data. Now, before I do that, I'm just gonna call this AP_final, and we'll hit enter. And now let's go ahead and close that data. So I'm just gonna click on close and load. And by default, Excel is gonna take all of my new queries and put them as new tables. So now I have the table for department heads loaded in and AP final. Now, I actually don't need this department heads loaded as a table, so I'm just gonna right click, I'll click on load to, and I'm going to instead just say only create connection. I can now delete this tab, and I'm actually gonna do the same thing for AP_September. Again, I really only need this final table here. So I'll right click this, load to, and I'll only click on only create connection. And let's delete that. Okay, now we have our table like we did last time. Let's change the table styling. In fact, I'm gonna make this the default style for all tables going forward. And I'll just right click and I'll click set as default. Still downloading QuickBooks reports manually? There's a better way. Introducing Model Wiz, your Excel automation superpower. One click to pull your financial data, another click to transform it into stunning dashboards. Create professional 3-statement models instantly. No more data entry. KPI dashboards, cash flow projections, pitch decks, all automated and all connected to your QuickBooks. This is actually our tool that we built after years and years of development, and you could try it absolutely for free at modelwiz.com. All right, well, now you can see again, my data is transformed even further. I have the information that I loaded from this initial AP table, but now I also have the department and department head, even though that information is not found in this file. Awesome. Now let's think about how we could rerun this entire process whenever I have October's data ready. Well, I have a few options. I can double click on the information over here in the October file. I can copy this information and I could come over here and paste it. But that's a lot of manual work. I don't want to really do that every month. Okay, well, I have other options. I could take the table from October's file and bring it in as a new tab into this file and just copy over the query. But that's also a bit of work. Okay, well, I know what I could do. I could once again just click on get data from file and load in the October file by pointing to it, clicking this button, clicking on transform data. And now that I have the October table, I could just change the source to, instead of it being linked to September, just click on October. But to be honest, all of that's a lot of work. So I'm just gonna undo what I did and instead utilize one of my favorite ways to load data, and that is via an entire folder. So before I do that, let me create a separate folder for these 4 files over here. So I'll call it AP Ledgers, and I'm just gonna bring all the information into this folder. Now, because I'm using the September file for the Power Query, let's just make a copy of this file. And instead, we're gonna call this accounts payable _ final. Okay, now let's take all the information over here and let me reset September's file, because now our Power Query is going to be in another file, and I'll just click on queries and connections. I'll enable the content. I'll hold down shift to delete all these. And now this file contains September data just like all the other files. So let's now go back into our file that contains the Power Query, and I'm going to click on data, get data from file, and then from folder. All right, so now I have the AP Ledgers folder. I'm just gonna click it and let's see what happens when I click on open. All right, looks like Excel found all 4 of the files. So I'm just gonna now hit the down arrow under combine and click combine and transform data. And now I'm back in the Power Query editor. So I'm gonna click on AP, which now shows me a preview of all the tables that I have. Let's go ahead and hit OK. And as you can see, it pulled in all 4 of the files: September, October, November, and December. Now, I'm not so sure why columns 7 through 9 got included, so I'm just gonna select this information and I'm gonna click on delete. Okay, now watch what I'm gonna do. The AP final over here needs to now refer to the AP ledgers that we just combined instead of the individual September. Well, that's really simple. For source, I'm just gonna double click over here, and now I'm gonna select the AP ledgers table. I'll click on company, and I'll click on OK. As you can see, it just pulled in all of the information and all the steps that we already did into now a combination of all of these files. Now it looks like I have some null values, which means they're not mapped properly. So let me just select all of the null values to see which ones are applicable. So it looks like NetSuite and Airbase don't have a proper department head. Well, that's okay. I'm gonna first just close and load to and only create a connection. Then I'm gonna open up my department heads file and I will put the departments for both of these vendors. I'm gonna go ahead and hit save and I'll hit refresh all on my Power Query file. And now I have all of my information loaded here. So now that I have it loaded to a folder, I don't really need September's data over here. So let's just get rid of that and I'll get rid of it as a connection as well. Okay, we're almost there. We now want to finalize this table by bringing in the exchange rate and transforming our data to show in US dollars rather than these foreign currencies. Well, just like last time, we're going to have to do a merge. Only this time, it's going to be on the table found in this file called exchange rates. And as you can see in this file, we have the exchange rate for pretty much every day from September all the way to today's current date. So let me just X out of this. And once again, I'll click Get Data, this time, again, from a separate Excel workbook. I'll point to the exchange rates and I'll import it. Let's select the first sheet and let's click Transform Data. And we're gonna call this Exchange Rates. And let's just bring AP Final at the bottom so that we know the sequence of things. Perfect. So now we want to bring in the exchange rate for each and every single row that we see over here. So for the euro over here, we want to pull in the exchange rate as of 9/2/2024. For British pounds, we want to pull in the exchange rate for September 6, 2024. Well, let's have a look again at the exchange rates table that we have. And this data actually isn't in an optimal format. Yes, this is still structured data, but think about it. Each of these columns don't really have their own purpose. Date has its own purpose, but now these are all the exchange rates for euros. These are all the exchange rates for Canadian dollars. These are all the exchange rates for the British pound and USD. It would be a lot more ideal if I converted these from 4 columns into 2. One column for the actual currency, the other column for the exchange rate, which means I'm going to unpivot my data. Now watch what happens when I right click and I click on Unpivot Other Columns. Excel just divided up every single row into 4 rows, one for each currency. In fact, I could double click and call this currency. And then over here, I can call this exchange rate. Notice the difference between when my data was in this format. Unpivoting data is actually one of my favorite things to do. Here's an example where I take semi-structured data in a profit and loss format and unpivot it just like we did over here, making it a lot easier to manipulate. So now that I have all the information as such, I can go back to my final query and perform that final merge. So I'm gonna click on Merge Queries, only instead of doing it as new, I'm gonna do it on this same ledger over here. And this time, I'm gonna actually merge on 2 factors, the invoice date and the currency. So watch, I'm just gonna hold down Control, then I'm gonna choose the exchange rates over here, and I'm gonna select date as well as currency. And look at that, 108 rows found a match. So these right now are being matched on 2 conditions. And remember, we need to do this because each row in our lookup table has to have a unique value for what we're merging our tables on. Dates are not unique. We have 4 dates, one for every currency. Currencies are not unique either. They get repeated for each and every date. But the combination of the 2 is unique. There's only one record for Euro on 9/1/2024. There's only one record for CAD on 9/2/2024. So I'm gonna now click on OK. And once again, I'll click this arrow and I'm gonna now only choose exchange rate. Let's rename this. Perfect, now we have the exchange rate. So what's left to do? Well, we just need to take the amount and multiply it by the exchange rate to get our US dollar value. So watch what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna click on Add Column and I'm gonna click Custom Column. Now, this is a window where it looks pretty simple for me to utilize. So I'm just gonna write over here USD value. And now I need to take the amount and multiply it by the exchange rate. Well, I'll just click on amount and I'll click on insert. Okay, it looks like it took the column name and surrounded it in brackets. So let's just see if I hit the asterisk and then I open the brackets and this time I say exchange rate. And it looks like Excel is already filling it out. So I'm gonna hit the tab and now what happens when I click OK? All right, now we have the US dollar value. Let's change this to be a whole number. And let's actually get rid of some of the columns that we don't really need here. So I don't really need the source name. I don't really need the exchange rate or the initial currency, because we're just gonna show everything now in US dollars. So holding Control, I selected all of these, and I'm just gonna click on Remove Columns. Okay, now let's see what our data looks like. So I'm gonna click on Close and Load, and now I have my transform table. But let's take this one step further. I don't really need it in a table, I need it in a pivot table. Well, instead of loading it as a table, I could right click, I'll click Close and Load To, and I'll click on Pivot Table Report. This is gonna go in a new worksheet. Now, I get this error message, or I get this warning that the query is currently connected to this table. So that means we're gonna lose any connections that we had to this table, which is okay. I only want it linked now to this pivot table. All right, so now I'm ready to populate my pivot table. And for that, I'm gonna put the department head as the filter, and we'll choose the company, followed by the invoice number, invoice date, and due date. And then for the values, we'll choose numbers. All right, let's fix this all up. So I'm just gonna zoom in a lot here. Let's remove the grid lines. I'm gonna right click at the topmost level, and I'm gonna click Collapse Entire Field. And let's just make this a little bit prettier. So I'm gonna click on Design, and we'll change our pivot table as such. Now let me click over here to change the formatting. I'm gonna click on Number Format, and we're gonna choose this as a number with parentheses and 0 decimal places. And now I could select, let's say James Wilson, and I'll only see the information related to James or Michael. I could also expand and showcase each invoice that's outstanding. But as a final step, let's just create a slicer for each department. So I'm gonna go back to the field list, and I'm gonna remove the department head as a filter, and then I'm gonna right click on department, and I'll click on Add a Slicer. Now let's just organize and put the information as such. I'm gonna right click, Slicer Settings, and uncheck Display Header. And for the slicer style, I'm just gonna click on Duplicate so that I can make my own slicer, and I'm gonna select Format, Fill, No Color. Then I'm gonna click on Border, and I'm gonna click on None. And there we have our floating slicer. Let's actually do one thing and just make it over 2 columns. And we can get rid of some of these empty rows. And now I could just filter on any department, and all of my information is instantly transformed. But the coolest part is each month, as I get a new file, all I need to do is come back to this and hit Data, Refresh All. Power Query is then gonna go through all those transformations again automatically. You set it up once, and it repeats each and every month. All right, I'm just gonna do one other change. I'm gonna click on Report Layout, and we're going to click Show in Tabular Form. Then do not show subtotals, repeat all label items. Then I'll right click here and say Expand Entire Field, and I'll right click here. And once again, I'll hit Expand Entire Field. And let's also just extend this as such. And let's make this slicer 4 columns. And there we have it. Now with our table, I can filter on any department and see how much is owed. So let's recap on what we covered. Power Query is an ETL tool. It extracts data from a wide variety of potential sources. It allows you to transform that data in pretty much any way you would in Excel, but without the need to really learn any formulas. And finally, you could load back your data in a structured format. You set up your automations once, and as your source data gets refreshed, so do your automations. And as you start to get more comfortable with Power Query, you'll want to take a journey into your next adventure with even crazier power you can bring to Excel, Excel's data model. And I'll see you there with me.